All right, that was high energy. I'll try and match it for you guys this morning. But I think this topic of regulation and putting it at the start of Token 2049, as we just heard there, the biggest event on the crypto calendar in Asia, at least for the course of this year, it just tells you how much this has been at the forefront of everyone's minds in the community, given, yes, a degree of progress that we've seen in a lot of jurisdictions here in Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, for instance, making modifications. But then you've, of course, got what's going on in the US. And so I think it probably makes sense to start there, given that's where all of you are based. So I'm going to kick off with just a broader question here. What would constitute a degree of a breakthrough for you in terms of the US regulatory landscape, given we just heard from the SEC chair overnight really sticking to his guns, Gary Gensler, in his Senate hearing committee hearing? So I'll not just because you're from Ripple, but I'll kick off with you, Brad.
Sure. So I guess I would argue we have had that breakthrough. I will start by saying I'm always an optimist, and so maybe I'm clouded by that. But people will often tell you, and frankly, Mike and I were talking backstage, like you don't want to fight the SEC. People will tell you the SEC always wins in the United States. And having the SEC lose not just the Ripple case, but also more recently the Grayscale case, I think is really a hard-hitting combo. The other thing I'll just call out, there were a couple of things that were said in the Grayscale case where three judges all unanimously agreed, and they used the words that the SEC is being arbitrary and capricious. I mean, these are like harsh words for one government agency in the judicial system to say about another government agency. So I would like to think the breakthrough has happened, and the call to action, I think, really is on Congress. And I think hopefully with some of these rulings that will change the tenor in Congress and we'll get some activity.
Hong, do you think we've already started to see some sort of change?
I would agree. I think the thing that I like about U.S. the most is the rule of law. And regardless of the case of Ripple or the Bitcoin ETF, you do see the court stepping in and making their voice heard. And I also think that in U.S. when it comes to exchange landscape, there have been regulation on the ground, but more at the state level. So I think the next one that we will be looking at is more clarity at the federal level, where there is a more unanimous and cohesive federal guidance when it comes to regulation. But I think that second step probably will take a little bit more time.
Following on with that, from what Hong just said, like the states are ready to go. Like state regulators are actually excited about digital assets, crypto. They know that their constituents want to see this. So we very much have an Alexander Hamilton versus Thomas Jefferson debate going on inside the US. Haven't had it for a long time. So you asked, like, what's the one thing I'd like to see? I'd like to see the politics removed from this thing. Because at the end of the day, this is actually about better money for people. And it's really pretty surprising that any political party is taking this as their, we're going to go kill a whole asset class because it fits well with our political ambitions.
But it is so political, though.
Money is power.
Well,
It is part of the industry.
I would argue it's not political. I mean, again, you were talking about the U.S. because it's a big economy and they're quite hostile towards crypto. But I think, it doesn't feel political here in Singapore. It feels like they're making smart policy that's driving innovation here locally. It doesn't feel political in the U.K. or Dubai or Switzerland where, it feels like they're actually being good government citizens and you're saying, hey, what's the right thing to protect consumers, to have regulatory clarity? And yes, some of it should be strict and some of it should be challenging for companies to operate in. But to kind of leave the ambiguity is allowing the SEC, that confusion gives them power and they're using that through their unlimited legal budget of just filing more lawsuits.
But sorry, on the political front, I think it's more of a US story, but you either have a chance that you see some sort of progress on the crypto bills or whether there's something that reaches the Supreme Court in the US instead, saying that the SEC possibly have had some sort of regulatory overreach. What do you think would be more likely?
We have been observing. We are hoping that there is some law coming out of this. Particularly, I think U.S. is in a very interesting time in its own political environment. But that's something that we as industry participants, as builders, cannot control. We can only control what we can control, which is to build the right product, continue to focus on the technology, and to support responsible regulation and engagement so that we can actually make sure we have a healthy environment. And I actually think that this regulatory uncertainty, this increasing scrutiny over the industry, to some extent is actually a good thing because it sparks discussion. It sparks the discussion around what is right, what is wrong. And when it comes to crypto, to Web3, it's new technology. There is a lot of blurred boundary around certain concepts. And I think having that discussion period and pushing people to actually focus on what actually matters for the customers, which is customer protection, is actually a good thing. And for that purpose, I think regulation and technology innovation is kind of in line, so to speak.
Do you see any silver linings to the lack of regulatory clarity in the US?
Well, I don't know. I think all of us here, by the way, have a responsibility to stay engaged, even though it seems like it's outside of our control, and to some degree, as individuals, that's true, but in aggregate, it's not. But if we're not careful, the easy path is to turn all of the benefits of blockchain, transparency, risk reduction, openness, back into the existing financial system. And we really do have to make sure that the laws that get passed are responsible ones. And blockchains are already superior to existing financial system markets. I can go into examples around travel rule and other things. You don't need the surveillance that you used to need in old systems. And so that's going to free up people. That's going to make better products. That's going to open up markets. I just hope we don't end up with what we had before.
The SEC has indicated that it's intending to possibly appeal the US court decision in terms of the XRP token, which is the native token of Ripple. What was your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, there's a nuance there. The SEC has requested a permission from the court to file an appeal. They actually can't appeal right now, so they have to get permission from the court to appeal because the case isn't fully closed. What's interesting, though, is they're not actually appealing, or at least they haven't signaled the intent to appeal the idea that is XRP a security. So the law of the land of the United States right now is XRP is not a security, full stop. The judge was very clear on that. So I view that as a very, very positive thing. I think it sets a very strong precedent for the whole industry. I think it's great for exchanges. I think it's great for custody providers. And I think, again, you're seeing a momentum shift. I think that it used to be, I think a lot of judges were like, well, the SEC's always right, and they weren't fighting that. And I think you're starting to see that the tenor change. Even the Coinbase case, I'm sure people are paying attention. Some of the questions from the judge in the Coinbase case are downright hostile, towards the SEC. So look, the frustrating thing, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, the SEC has an unlimited budget. You're literally fighting the man. They can go and go and go, and they can keep appealing. But as Hong was saying, the judicial process in the United States, while sometimes slow, sometimes frustrating, it's actually working. And I think you have seen, to your initial question, I think the tide is turning, and I think the roadmap for how other companies can go after the SEC, they're following some of the exact same things Ripple did, and I think that's great for the whole industry.
What about the Bitcoin spot ETFs? Do you see that changing at all? Any sort of approvals by the end of the year?
My personal view is that if the future ETF has been approved, I cannot see the spot ETF not being approved anytime. It's a matter of time, I think. And we saw the court ruling, and I think it would be hard not to see it being approved, or unless the future ETF is overturned, basically, which is probably hard. But that's my personal point of view. I don't know.
Look, BlackRock's participation is a big difference from where we've been in the past. It's absolutely going to happen. All of us know that, and it's just a matter of time at this point. My guess is that the current SEC is going to continue to fight it. I hope that we do see an approval. I wish I could be more optimistic about it, but at least so far, we saw Gary Gensler's comments yesterday, and he's doubling down on kind of the same things he's been saying. So I think until kind of they get a little more capitulation on like, hey, this has to happen. It's your job to make it happen. That's the will of the people. As soon as he turns the corner on that, then maybe we can start talking about a spot ETF coming to life. Until then, unfortunately, probably not in the US. Opportunity abroad for others to step in and fill the gaps in other jurisdictions.
What sort of impact do you think that would have on the market dynamics if one were approved?
Actually, it's interesting. There could be downward pressure, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
So if you start to see like the GBTC starting to have a conversion and then a way out, there's probably a lot of people locked up in there that would love to have an ETF and then be able to exit. But that would be temporary. I mean, overall, this is massive flows that can come in. There are definitely elements where digital assets have not been able to permeate in the markets. The one I would highlight is the pension funds. Look, pension funds, obviously there's some of the largest flows of money that exist, and they have stacks of committees that make investment choices. They need to know what risks are being taken at each step of the process, everything from when they deliver those funds through how it's custodied, through how it's traded, which parties are involved, et cetera. On an ETF, they could start to have exposure on these things without having to worry about that part of the problem.
I think there's huge implication on custody, institutionalized custody for Bitcoin. I also think that the question I have on my mind from a personal perspective is whether our industry is actually ready for it. Because once you have spot ETF available for Bitcoin, yes, a lot more retail money will come in through pension fund and other institutional money. We will probably see Bitcoin as an asset class really grow, but there's also volatility on the one hand. On the other hand, are we really ready as an industry to build more applications related to Bitcoin so that it's not just a financial asset? Because remember that we started as an industry to think that we're not just creating one different asset class. We're actually creating something that is new, that we can build on top of a new set of monetary system that hasn't come to fruition yet. So I don't know whether we're ready for that yet from a industry infrastructure perspective.
Before we got on this panel, I was walking around. Obviously, it's very early in the day. I had some caffeine, not as much caffeine as our host, but it was awesome to see, and to Hong's point, the amount of activity out there and companies building. People talk about crypto winters, crypto spring, whatever. Like, people are building right now, and I think we've gotten less focused on just speculative trading and more focused on what utility are we building. And I think some companies lost sight of that at various times. And look, a lot of companies had layoffs this year. A lot of companies have struggled. I think those that have taken a long view are, as Ripple is, we've made 2 acquisitions. We're going to keep investing. Our balance sheet is strong. We're hiring. I think this is the time when you want to actually build. When there's fear out there, I think now's the time to actually lean in. And so I'm optimistic that it drives the exact activity we're seeing out in the hall.
When you talk about building, it's also the question of who you're building for. And the amount of investors that have left the space and the amount of interest that has perhaps gone into other sectors, even from the VC funds, for instance, going more into AI. But I question, when you take a look at the liquidity in the market so far, whether there's going to be enough of an audience, whether that trust has been built up, because you just mentioned that the acquisitions you've made, and one of those, Fortress Trust, just came out overnight and said that they had been hacked, the exchange. And I know that you said Ripple has made those customers whole, but it still points to issues that are within the sector in terms of accountability. And how do you think we're going in cleaning that up?
So look, I first want to clarify something, because the incident that happened with Fortress Trust, there were 4 accounts out of about 200,000 that were compromised, and they weren't compromised by Fortress, they weren't compromised by the infrastructure. BitGo performed exactly as they're supposed to and very well. Fireblock, same. So what happened there was the compromise of a third-party tool, and it was basically a spear phishing attack, which isn't unique to crypto. And so I think when we talk about this, yes, the quote negative, the victim, if you will, was a crypto outcome. But look, Fidelity suffers from spear phishing attacks every day. BlackRock, I mean, you name it. when someone compromises an end user's credentials, that creates problems. It doesn't matter if you're talking about crypto, you're talking about banks, you're talking about securities. So I think sometimes we talk about it as there's still something, quote, wrong with crypto. These are problems that affect, I think, the whole industry.
Look, when it comes to custody, you have to be perfect. So securing billions of dollars of assets, we like to think of like, well, maybe there's a platform just around the key management that matters. It's actually layers and layers that matter. Everything in your platform, from the very bottom of your stack to the very top, has to be considered for security, and it's possible to have failures. So the good news here, I mean, we didn't have a catastrophic loss. To Fortress, it might have been somewhat catastrophic. Fortunately, they found a way to make all of the customers whole, which is great. Ripple stepped in, so it's really got a pretty happy ending there. I think if there's anything that's not as good as it could be, is just like getting the transparency out so that people can see what's going on, kind of inside of custody. In terms of infrastructure, I tend to agree. I think we actually have the infrastructure today to be able to support a Bitcoin ETF type of product. We definitely have robust custody. However, to your point about liquidity, that's dried up because there's a lot of lack of confidence in the post-FTX world. So bringing this back to regulation for a moment, regulation is hard for all of us to think of like, what is regulation? Well, I guess it's investor protection. Maybe that's the one thing that everybody agrees. But that is a big, big bowl of stuff. And if you start to break out, like, what does that mean? Well, there's some things at the bottom. How about, like, keeping the assets safe so they can't be stolen? Last time we thought about that was about 1850, I think, when we had stagecoaches, taking gold between different parties. Look, with crypto, we have to think about that again. The physical safety of the asset is really important. The next rug pulls and fraud and things like that. After FTX happened, Elizabeth Warren comes out and she says, what we have here is a failure of AML KYC. We need those crypto companies to have AML policies. Well, look, I think that's true, but that had nothing to do with FTX. So regulators and legislators have to get their priorities straight as to what matters first. And frankly, the highest priority item when it comes to crypto regulation, I think should focus on the basics of making sure the assets are safe and can't be rug pulled. Now, investor protections, disclosures, best execution, self-dealing prevention, all of that stuff is bad. That needs to be handled. But you got to start with the basics. And anyway, right now we're talking about custody a little bit, so I think that's how that came into play for me. I would like to see the regulators really focus on prioritizing the stack of what needs to happen, make it so we can't have an FTX anymore. That'll bring the confidence back. We won't have the liquidity issues, and then we go on.
But we have seen regulatory progress in other jurisdictions. So, Hong, sorry, you were going to...
No, I was actually going to add on what Mike was saying because you talk about building for whom, and then Mike was talking about transparency and the pain points and the regulation, which is actually what we agreed with because when we think about the pain points for the customers and the liquidity drying up, it's exactly because of lack of confidence in the industry. And that lack of confidence is because of the lack of transparency. People cannot see when there's intermediary taking custody. And what we really believe in is, there are two parallels, right? One is the traditional regulatory framework that we need to embrace, but at the same time, we would love to be part of developing this and evolving this. And from our perspective, we think that adding the technology tools to increasing the transparency is really important. That's why we have been really focusing on developing the proof of reserve program online, automated, open source with ZK technology to really prove that the assets are backed up 100% and people can go and check on a monthly basis regularly. So, the platforms are held accountable. And, it's our hope that some things like this can be over time a part of the regulation for our industry so that it's actually technology-driven instead of intermediary-driven. And ultimately, individuals can take more accountability as well.
The sooner that the regulators stop fighting, actually, the sooner we can help them make the markets better. So you mentioned proof of reserves, fantastic. Right? The auditing system that we have in today's markets across the globe is pretty terrible. You have your quarter end, and then somewhere around 90 days later, you get the report on what was happening, almost 180 days earlier inside of that company. Yeah. Blockchains, proofs of reserve, these are real-time types of things. So if you start to add proof of reserves and proof of liabilities, you still need auditors. I'm not saying you don't need it. But we can help the regulators have like a real-time view into what's going on. Now, that doesn't help regulators. That ultimately, that's about making sure investors are protected. But we got to stop fighting on the basics, settle on the definitions, make sure that everybody's agreeing that we're moving forward. And yeah, I guess I'm still a little frustrated with the US regulation. Actually, the rest of the world is in a lot better shape.
And I think the beauty of having the technology solution is that, compared to traditional audit is a snapshot of one certain time, and you cannot see in between. But in crypto, in Web3, actually everything is on chain. We put out all our addresses out there. Everybody can go and check the fund inflow and outflow all the time, real time. So I think that's part of the advantage of the technology, and we should try to actually utilize it for people's benefit.
We have seen regulatory progress, though, in other jurisdictions, across Asia, Europe, Middle East. Why hasn't that been enough, then, to spur confidence?
I'll challenge the question, meaning, look, I remember when Bitcoin hit, I don't know, 15 or 16,000. I think today it's 25 or 26,000. Like, there actually, wasn't that long ago that Bitcoin was at 2,000. So I think sometimes it's just, you got to zoom out a little bit further. And when I hear say, why hasn't it spurred confidence? Look, Ripple's growing. I mean, we're not growing in the United States. We're growing outside the United States. And so it's because I think there have been leaders who are progressive and thoughtful about where the world is going for a lot of the reasons why Hong and Mike have already articulated, the benefits of blockchain and crypto technologies. So I think, I don't look at it and think, oh, the market's really suffering. I think, sure, it's nicer when, Bitcoin was at 60,000, but I just think we should zoom out a little bit and be like, wow, this industry has come a long way. There are 10,000 plus people here for Token2049. I'm guessing by the time Dubai comes around for next year's event, like there's going to be more people. But I remain very optimistic about the direction of travel, in part because of the court system, in part because other jurisdictions are providing that clarity. And even these are major economies. The UK is totally leaning into crypto. They're making sure there's consumer protections, but as Mike just said, the only country I would not encourage people to start a company in right now is the US. There's probably some others, but the US is a big one to call out.
What do you make of the progress that we've seen in other jurisdictions this year?
Look, I think we've all actually been in the space for a long time. I think Brad said it pretty well. This space has come very far, very fast. The conversations that we were having back in 2013 and 2014 about what was the industry going to look like, and even back then, people recognized that sooner or later there's kind of a butting of heads between regulation and digital assets. We have to have it. We have to have safe markets. We want that. We want investor protections. We don't want scams. Everybody's in that same boat. But it's going to be a tumultuous time, and it certainly is. So I share Brad's optimism about it's actually a lot better than you think. It's just that the U.S. is right now the third rail of crypto regulation.
The one thing maybe I'll say, which to add a bit of controversy to this, I still think there is an underlying segment of the crypto world that is so anti-regulation and all about anonymity. In my judgment, if we want this industry to thrive and achieve, I think, what it can to fundamentally rewire how financial infrastructure works, we can't pretend that government regulation doesn't matter. And I still think, frankly, one of the problems in the United States is you have, even within the industry, infighting, right? You've got these various, lobbying organizations in the United States, in Washington, D.C., with lots of members from the crypto community, and they all don't agree. And so, I've been to Capitol Hill. I'm sure maybe both of you have as well. You go to a senator or a representative's office, and there have been two other crypto people in there earlier in the day saying different things than what I'm saying. And there's some basic things I feel like we have to agree. If we want that progress, we have to agree on some basic things. And I think, I still do find categories of the crypto community fighting some of these basic regulatory frameworks. AML is going to matter. KYC is going to matter. And if you're taking the point of view that we're going to circumvent those things, that's not the industry I see out 5 and 10 years from now that really is thriving and growing. Because I think that just gives fuel to the fire for politicians who do like to, just make noise, and they don't understand what's going on in crypto or what brought down FTX.
What about the strictness of regulations? Because OKX, for instance, is applying for the license in Hong Kong by the end of the year. That's a jurisdiction that's very high on investor protection. It's very expensive to get the license there. And it also is very narrow, the legislation, where you can only trade a few tokens. So it's quite a tough environment. What do you make it when the regulation goes that far?
I would say, we actually have quite a few licenses in process, and with basically all regulators that we are having conversations and discussions with, all of them are very focused on customer protection. There are very constant themes coming up: customer protection, corporate governance. Whether you are separating the customer assets, whether you are actually having trading against your customers. Those are very constant themes, and I think those are heading in the right direction. And with almost all regulators, they also take a very experimental approach. They want to take baby steps and figure out what actually works and make sure that they are doing the right thing for their jurisdiction, which I also think is the right thing. So from our perspective, we are very supportive of that, and in every jurisdiction that we operate where we are pursuing a license, we make sure that we actually have active engagement with the regulator, design our product at the MVP level, and then gradually push it forward. And I don't think there's a problem with that. And I think back to your question of why the market is where it is. I think we still need more clarity down the road because different jurisdictions are shaping up. Hong Kong, Singapore, EU, we're seeing more clarity, but it's still in development. I think a lot of people are still kind of in a watching mode. And then secondly, the capital markets, what I've learned from my Wall Street experience is that capital markets sometimes have to react to certain things. Like they need impetus, they need to take pills. And they tend to sometimes overreact. And I don't think we're there yet. I think the industry is constantly building, but we're not there yet. We haven't seen a new application coming out that is attracting a broad attention. An example, or even a spot ETF getting approved can probably serve as a stimulus, but we're not there yet.
But what about the profitability, though? Because when you're in a market where it's a tough environment, and going back to the example of Hong Kong, it's a city of 7 or 8 million people. It can't support that many exchanges when you can only offer a few tokens. So how do you operate in that sort of environment, and why do you continue to pursue licenses in those areas?
It's important, right? Because I think either from an industry perspective or from a platform perspective, we want to have sustainable growth. We want to position ourselves for the long term. We have been around for a long time. From our perspective, there are things you can control. There are revenue stream, and then there are costs. You have to be very conscious about how you spend money, how you grow, and we are very conscious of that. We make very careful decisions, and we manage our risk well as well. So.
Kind of hitting on this a little bit, all the companies here are happy to do whatever regulators require. And they may set a really high bar, and we will meet it. And that'll be fine. The challenge we are going to have on the other side is, actually all three of our companies were relatively small just 10 years ago in the landscape of things. And we're now big enough that we can afford some of this. But if we aren't careful, we're going to knock out the innovators. And there's going to be new innovators, right? Every company goes through this. So we need to apply new rules rather than the existing rules. And this is difficult because sometimes regulators hear this and they think that you don't want to obey the rules. That's not the truth. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is the existing rules will by definition, by having the surveillance, by having the teams required just to get started, prevent new innovation from happening. So that's my big concern for kind of the way things unfold next.
How do you look at the question of profitability in a market like this?
Look, the thing I get excited about, and I imagine there's a lot of entrepreneurs out here building in the crypto space, is I don't think about that at a static point in time, right? If you were looking at that just today, and even to your core question that was kind of directed at Hong around OKX. If Hong Kong only allows a certain number of tokens to be traded, that's limiting. I would bet that, well, I don't know what Hong thinks. What I think is that's a starting point. And yes, maybe for the next year or two, it's a small list, and then after that, it'll be wider, and it won't be just be to 7 or 8 million people in Hong Kong. It turns out there's a few, more than 1 billion in that broader community. And look, you're betting on where the world is going to be. I fundamentally believe that where crypto is headed, where blockchain is headed, for a lot of macro factors, the wind is at our back. And if we just look at profitability today, yeah, it's a lot harder to have a profitable business with less liquidity today, prices where they are. That's harder. But if you look at where I think the world is going to be a little bit further out, I'm very excited about what that looks like. Call me the optimist, call me naive, call me all those things, but I've been more right than I've been wrong. I mean, Ripple's in a very good position, so I feel good about that bet. And we're going to continue to invest and hire more people and acquire more companies because I believe about where the world is going.
When you said more than 1 billion people, it made me think of China. So you're saying that you think China could change its stance?
Look, if you told me, a couple of us were talking about this before we got up here. If you had told me a year or two ago that Hong Kong would change its stance, I wouldn't have believed you. I don't know. Let's see what happens. Well, you know more about this than I do, I'm sure.
We will take whatever comes. We'll deal with it.
I don't know how to predict where that's going to go. I just think, again, I remember first reading that Hong Kong was changing its posture. I mean, I personally view Hong Kong as potentially a leading indicator to where broader China goes. We'll see. I am not a China expert. I don't pretend to be, but
we'll see more ups and downs. I mean, India has also been an on switch and an off switch, I think 3 times over. I can't keep track of it fully. Hong Kong was out 3 months ago, suddenly came back, surprises everybody. Of course, we're all trying to figure out what's the right way to grow in Southeast Asia, what's the right place to plant your largest roots. This is going to continue to go up and down a little bit for the short to medium term, but in the long term, I think we're generally seeing everything turn on.
The other thing I would say as a proxy for this, one part of Ripple's business is we work with central banks to issue central bank digital currencies. We've announced about 10 central bank deals. We're talking to a whole bunch more than that. Again, if you had told me, zoom out, if you told me 4 or 5 years ago we would have deals with 10 different central banks around the world to prototype, test, or launch a central bank digital currency, I'd have been like, that is incredible.
There is an argument against CBDCs, though.
I agree with those arguments. But central banks as a customer want to test, they want to evaluate. In some countries will go forward and they will do it. I think it's unclear to me how that world plays out.
Do you have any views on CBDCs you want to share?
Look, CBDCs are kind of a whole class to themselves that I do feel are largely out of our control. It has a lot more to do with kind of how the federal banks decide to move forward. But I think some of the concerns we have there actually apply back to the regulation that's being put onto just all the general assets. I mentioned the travel rule. I want to mention this really clearly. The biggest recoveries in not just digital assets, but any asset ever in the history of regulators have been on blockchains. They've been on blockchains without having extensive monitoring and AML, KYC, and suspicious activity reports fully plumbed through the system. How can that happen? Well, it's because you have a blockchain, right? All of a sudden, when you are a regulated entity and you're doing transaction monitoring, not only do you see who it came from, but you see who it came from before that, and before that, and before that, and before that. This is like new power. By the way, it's dangerous power. And it creates a world where suddenly the travel rule can accidentally dox the sender of any amount of coins. So we need the regulators to fully understand what's happening here. They should be excited about the features that they're getting, but they also should be careful not to overlay policy on top of it, which is too privacy revealing. If we do that, we could end up with blockchain not getting adopted because actually in the end it's not for the people anymore. It actually doesn't work. And I'm not talking about avoiding government regulations. I'm talking about you spent on something that you don't want other people to know. And we have to be careful that we don't end up in that world.
Got a couple of minutes left, so I want to end with a little bit of stargazing. The topic today, kicking off Token 2049, is regulation. If we were all to meet again in 12 months from now, what would be the topic of discussion?
What would be a good topic? Or
The topic of discussion 12 months from now.
Things will be better. The judicial system will continue to, I think, come to bat and help fix things in America. I think that we will see more clarity at that level. I think the bear market is actually kind of good. I tell this to a lot of people. I kind of hope that it hangs out for like 18 months because there's a ton of building going on in this room and outside this room right now. And when the markets are a little bit more throttled, you get to focus on building the plumbing right. Somewhat is what Hong was describing as well. So, look, I think when we come back in a year, we're going to be very ready, actually, for big moves.
I'll try to answer it. Look, last year, or the last 12 months, and I'm cheating a little bit with how I'm counting months, but we have had major headwinds for crypto. Mike talked about FTX, Celsius, Three Arrows, certainly the SEC, more lawsuits. Like, it is massive headwinds. And oh my God, Bitcoin's at 25,000 or 20, whatever it is today. I view that as a very, very positive thing. So when you ask the question of a year from now, I don't know what the next FTX is. I hope it's not one. What I would bet, unfortunately, is I think there will be more unexpected things, and it's the resilience of the entrepreneurs in this room, and it's the resilience of these markets it's where my optimism comes from. The one maybe nugget I'll offer there is I think the stablecoin business will be a major topic a year from now because I think a lot's going to change.
Your question made me confirm one thing, which is I don't think I should be in media, period, because I don't think I will be able to predict the trends for next year's topic. But if you ask me what I would want to hear, I think I would hope that we are not talking about regulation. Not that regulation is not important, but that hopefully there's more clarity by then. And the focus is around product, around technology. There's actually a lot of interesting, exciting stuff going on in the industry about the layer 2, scaling of the layer 2 through different solutions around transparency versus privacy. Can we actually provide transparency while preserving privacy? And there's actually a lot of interesting solutions that people are trying. And we as a platform also invested a lot in those Web3 technologies. And I hope that next year we actually come back to talk about those stuff that actually can lay down foundation for a real longer-term, bull market.
Great. Well, Brad, Hong, Mike, thank you very much for your time this morning. Kicking off Token 2049 for this year in Singapore. Thanks.
Thank you.